everyone. It's thrilling and exciting to be here. Such an honor. To introduce myself briefly, I'm an assistant professor at the Georgia Institute of Technology, and my work there is at the intersection of human-centered computing and global development. And I bring my skills and training in computing, design, and ethnography to almost everything that I do. I'd like to begin by sharing the origins of my work. So, trained as a computer scientist, my first job was that of a software design engineer at a company called Microsoft, where I was writing code for a product called PowerPoint, which I have not used since. I really haven't. I switched to Keynote and I've stuck with Keynote. I had my quarter life crisis there, is how I call it, when I got to asking myself why I was developing technology for technology's sake. And I went and got myself a second master's degree in a program on learning design and technology at Stanford University. But in the context that I found most compelling, and ones that I will talk about today, the access problems seemed larger than the learning problems. So I chose to do a PhD in a School of Information at UC Berkeley, where my work took a critical ethnographic perspective on what constitutes development, studying how leisure-driven mobile technological practices could motivate informal learning and self-empowerment among Indian youth on the margins. These youth are among those that we refer to today as the next billion users, the next 4 billion, the next 5 billion, the bottom of the pyramid, among many other such labels. And yes, most of them are people of color. At the start of my PhD, which was in around 2009, there was a major push for financial inclusion in India, and that's where I wanted to do my research. And I became interested in designing mobile tools for the financial literacy of these users. A major transformation was taking place at the time that continues at an accelerated pace today. The mobile phone was becoming increasingly ubiquitous. It was everywhere, in almost every hand, and technologists, myself included, were keenly investigating the impact that this could have across the world, particularly for historically underserved communities. My first field research experience in the PhD took me to this remote rural town of Banswara in Rajasthan, India. I was visiting a microfinance nonprofit that worked with these women to help cultivate financially responsible practices. I was there to observe these women, to understand their workflows, and identify opportunities for the participatory design of a mobile technological solution that could ease their workflows in some way. And in my interviews with these women, I asked them what problems they had, and they said none. And I didn't believe them, so I probed harder, and they laughed at me, insisting, "We don't have any problems. What problems do you think we should have?" And in my mind, there were many problems that they should have had. There was the laborious note-taking, having to manage several paper records all at once. There were struggles with low literacy that I thought they would have, and so on. But in their eyes, this wasn't so. They had access to more structured information than ever before. Paper was a familiar resource. They had no problem using that. Record keeping was time-consuming, but it was an activity that they did together, and they didn't feel the lack of literacy, really. Their laughter made me uncomfortable, as you can imagine, and it forced me to reflect for a while after I had left the field. And this turned out to be a defining moment for me, as I delved deeper into trying to deconstruct my own attachment to problem discovery and a deficit-focused mindset. Over time, thinking about deficit made me feel increasingly stuck, increasingly frustrated, and increasingly interested in learning not just what was lacking or absent amid these communities that I worked with, but also what was present, the tangible and intangible resources that we could work with together. I began focusing instead on taking an assets-based approach to design and to global development. Now, this seems straightforward, especially when you look at this image, right? You can see the deficit, you can see the asset, but there can be many different kinds of assets, and some are not always easy to identify. As researchers and designers who care about user experience, in this room there are many, we might agree that the first step to uncovering assets entails developing empathy towards the user and their context. But this becomes so much more challenging when the end user is starkly different from us, perhaps because they belong to a different race, different gender, different class. To better design for difference, for many kinds of difference, we use the lens of intersectionality. What is intersectionality? Well, at this point, it's seen as a bit of a buzzword, but here's one academic definition. The complex, irreducible, varied, and variable effects which ensue when multiple axes of differentiation, economic, political, cultural, psychic, subjective, and experiential, intersect in historically specific contexts. Now, that's a mouthful, but just to give you a brief introduction, the term was introduced by Kimberly Crenshaw as a frame for recognizing the experiences and struggles of black women. And what she said was that they're different from those of white women, and they are different from those of black men. We use intersectionality to recognize these different kinds of difference and to understand their impact. It's a heavily theorized concept at this point, with many competing streams of thought, but it can also be quite powerful. Applying this lens to our work, our target users are located at the intersections of multiple processes of marginalization. For example, they may be socioeconomically disadvantaged, victims of patriarchy, infrastructurally challenged, discriminated by caste, class, religion, or all of the above. These are the forms of oppression that they may be subject to. Their single biggest privilege, if we go by dominant discourse, is that they are rapidly becoming owners of the mobile technologies that their global north counterparts have. But there are also several other privileges, such as the presence of care, extensive social ties, and the human agency that capitalizes on each of these. Sorry. So one thing I want to point out is that we don't view these intersections as being kind of static, isolated buckets or categories, but really as dynamic processes of oppression and resistance. Now, to take an assets-based approach to design, we focus on both the forms of privilege that are more obvious as assets, right? But also the forms of oppression that might uncover processes of resistance, which we might then be able to repurpose as assets. At the Tandem Lab, which is short for Technology and Design for Empowerment at Georgia Tech, our goal is to target community-driven social change by designing 4 intersections. We engage in ethnographic methods to deeply understand intersections or the multiple forms of oppression and privilege that might shape the communities that we target. Next, we leverage this understanding to identify assets, and assets could be material or non-material, static or dynamic, overt or hidden. And we then mobilize available assets through designing computing technologies to target one or more sustainable development goals. I'll now briefly talk about what we've done towards 4 of these goals, and there are inevitable overlaps. For example, clean water and sanitation also aid health outcomes, goals 6 and 3. Poverty is linked with inequality, goals 1 and 10. I'll touch upon our work in education first. So we conducted a design ethnography across 9 resource-constrained learning environments in 3 Indian states, in the west, in the south, and east of India. And this was done to identify pathways that we could use for designing education technologies that could leverage the existing growing penetration of mobile phones. When we completed this ethnography, we decided to extend our involvement with one of these learning environments, Vikas, which is an after-school center in urban Mumbai that caters to children of nearby slum communities. We worked with the teachers and in collaboration with Google to introduce cardboard viewers and Google Expeditions to the students, and this was on the request of the teachers. Expeditions has a large repository of 360-degree content on landforms, natural ecosystems, cities across the world, and such. It runs on Wi-Fi, it doesn't need internet, and teachers can use their tablet or phone to select content, which is then downloaded to every student's smartphone. Students can then insert their device into the cardboard viewer and experience the tour immersively. After engaging in extensive co-design with the teachers, we collaboratively put together a curriculum that would creatively repurpose the content of Expeditions to augment lesson plans that the teachers were already using. Students loved the experience, and the teachers noted an increase in the questions that they asked, as well as a change in the nature of questions asked. So instead of asking what and where questions, they were now asking why and how questions. For example, why is the Colosseum shaped like that? I can see its walls are broken in many places. What happened? Why did they bring this huge statue of Christ on top of this hill in Brazil? Why did they do this? Do people worship this statue? So these are just some examples of the questions that we asked, that we heard asked. And Georgia Tech published an article because they were excited about this research and they loved this image on the right. And it was distributed to a large network of schools, of teachers across the state of Georgia. And we ended up getting a lot of emails about how these schools could bring this technology into their classrooms. Now, this was much to our surprise because it was the first time that we were sharing lessons learned in the global south towards adoption by relevant or similar stakeholders in the global north. So we expanded our horizons to include the US in our scope for global development and worked with students who came from less privileged backgrounds in Atlanta. This time, we were focusing on storytelling through content creation with the goal of allowing students to engage actively with their social, economic, and political realities. And we used low-cost 360-degree cameras and cardboard viewers. Students created these and many more storyboards to depict the challenges of hunger and homelessness in Atlanta, which is a significant problem, before recording their videos. And we saw a clear change in attitudes towards the homeless. At first, they used these words to describe what came to mind when they thought about homelessness, and you can read, they're not very positive sounding words. So broke, smelly, depressed, dirty, and so on. After the study was conducted, here's what they said. I learned that everyone's situation isn't the same, so you just can't judge people based on how they look or what perceptions you may have of them. I learned that most of the stereotypes aren't true. Most homeless people could look just like you and me. People think it's the homeless person's fault that they are homeless, but that is wrong. We're continuing along this path of investigating what instructional value VR might bring into resource-constrained learning environments. For example, one of my students has been looking into how VR experiences can generate greater confidence among African American girls towards learning STEM. To further explore this value, we founded Inspirit, which is a VR social venture that aims to meaningfully integrate VR into diverse educational contexts. And that's not a trivial task. So the challenge that I'd like to pose now is this. Whether we think about VR or about the many other emerging technologies that are becoming increasingly affordable, how might we make a practice of cutting through the hype and taking a co-designed approach to integrating these technologies into everyday environments, whether it is in school or out of school, in the global south or in the global north, engaging both lived and virtual realities? The next goal, gender equality, is a big one for us. Now, designing technologies for various aspects around women's health is incredibly still a relatively unexplored phenomenon, even more so when there are many cultural taboos in play. This is one domain where my students and I have been actively working for several years. One of the areas that we've looked at extensively is that of menstrual health education in India. Now, menstrual stigma is real, and there's a reason this is known as the IT problem of global development. Though it is by no means limited to the global south, as our research in the US has also shown. In India, menstruation remains a conversational taboo and less understood in both public and private spaces. It also frequently impacts the mobility of women and the opportunities that are available to them within and outside of their households. There are initiatives, great initiatives, such as Menstrupedia, launched by Aditi Gupta and Tuhin Paul, based in Bangalore, India. And we've studied this, and we confirm the incredible value of having this. So Menstrupedia, just to say a little bit about it, takes a ludic approach to designing educational content, seeking to lessen the discomfort that adolescents might feel when they engage with it. But we have still a long way to go. Our research on Menstrupedia and menstrual health education in general has pointed out two major needs. First, that taking an ecological approach is essential. And what do I mean by that? Well, we need to work to engage multiple stakeholders across genders, whether it's parents, teachers, doctors, peers, NGOs, in different ways and at different points of intervention. And second, information dissemination is a first step, but we also need to focus on embodiment, on how challenges with menstruation are experienced and felt at a physical level as well. This grapples with a big question for information dissemination type interventions in the field of global development. How might we go beyond the receipt of information to fostering the active learning of it? I'll move on now. So our work on gender equality shares a generous overlap with the work that we've been doing on community health. Now, in India, as in several parts of the global south, community health workers are seen as crucial intermediaries. One of their major responsibilities towards the government is data collection on institutional deliveries, immunization, use of birth control methods, among other things. For most adult women in resource-constrained communities, especially the young women in the households where we've been doing our research, these workers are sometimes the only health resource that they have reliable contact with. Because these women are well connected across both contexts, they serve as an important bridge, a liaison, and could serve more effectively as valuable intermediaries. There are rich knowledges that they possess about the communities where they work, right, the situated knowledges, as we call them, that could be more strongly channeled for superior healthcare delivery. Now, with geo-internet, which is super inexpensive, these health workers are fast going online, connecting and participating on social media such as WhatsApp and Facebook. And that was much to our surprise. Again, we didn't really expect to find these health workers communicating with each other on social media. So how might we take this adoption as an asset and build on it? One thing that we're in the midst of designing is a virtual assistant for the community health worker called Chitra. And Chitra actually means many things. It literally means a picture, visualization. It's also a common name for an Indian woman. And we can also use it as a backronym for community health informatics that reimagines assets. But that was an afterthought. So this is meant to allow the worker to interpret and visualize her community as she sees it, not as the authorities see it. The goal is to understand the challenges that these workers face in their current data collection practices and how they can leverage their existing and emerging digital literacies. Yes, data is important, and it is rapidly becoming more and more so as we move into an increasingly AI-powered future, but there is a human in the loop here with rich contextual knowledge that is yet to be effectively captured, who needs to also recognize the value of her work for data to be reliable, and has at her fingertips the kind of technologies that could be appropriately leveraged. Here we have the community health worker, but in other contexts, there are other key intermediaries, key humans whom we can and must engage to effectively bridge societal layers. And now to goal number 11, targeting sustainable cities and communities. This summer, we're launching a Makers in Residence program at Maker Ghat, which is a makerspace catering to the children and youth in communities around slum areas of Mumbai. This was founded by 2 students of the Tandem Lab, and it's a program that is in collaboration with Georgia Tech and Stanford University, aiming to bring students from these universities to work with and out of Maker Ghat. These makers in residence will be pursuing research and social impact projects over the summer that are in line with the needs and aspirations as expressed by local community actors. They will connect with local community initiatives in their areas of interest and figure out necessary social and technical support to get these initiatives up and running. So areas might include participatory data collection for community mapping, waste management and reduction, monitoring water quality and spread of disease, among others. And these problems have been framed by the community actors themselves. Now, over the following year, we will be monitoring these efforts and what it takes to sustain them in the absence of these visitors or not. Our larger vision is for Maker Ghat to serve as an avenue, a channel for sustained community-driven change and for visiting researchers and entrepreneurs to make this happen as far as possible. Now, Maker Ghat's role is to leverage assets within the community to address problems. But maybe they aren't problems, maybe they're aspirations coming to life. So to summarize, in each of these domains, we work with intersectionally diverse populations across class, gender, health conditions, abilities, and such. The assets that we've identified range across enactment of care, ecologies of committed actors, critical intermediaries like the health workers, and grassroots-driven innovation like at Maker Ghat. Together, they've led us closer to, 1, democratizing VR for resource-constrained learning environments across Atlanta and Mumbai, so the global north and the south, designing ecologically appropriate menstrual health education interventions, prioritizing engagement and value derived by health workers, and mobilizing communities' efforts such that they can identify and address their own problems instead of having to ask outsiders into the community, what problems should we have? Coming back to this room, what might those of us who care about good product design and building empathy towards the user learn from these examples? Well, we live in a world that is rapidly changing on multiple fronts. There is more war, more strife, more mental health epidemics than ever before. There's more difference making, more intersections, but also more possibilities for design to make an impact. Not only because there is so much to fix, but also because there are so many assets that we can uncover, human, technological, sociocultural, that we can recognize and mobilize. I'd like to end on this personal note. Often we think about global development as offering help to others. But truly a question to ask ourselves, and one that I've been asking myself since I met those women in Baswara, is this. Is it really help that we are seeking to offer, or is it a path of liberation that we desire for ourselves? I leave you with this quote that is attributed to Lila Watson and to the people that she works with. She's an Aboriginal activist, and this is a quote that has been a guiding light for me through the years. If you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. And with that, I'd like to say, if you think that is true for us, I would love to work together. I presented to you about 10 years of work in a span of 10 minutes. So if you'd like to know more, please get in touch on email, Facebook, Twitter, anything. And if you think you'd rather be reading academic papers, then you're welcome to visit my website. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Well, it's a hugely important topic. I think it also shows that when we're building products and services for larger groups of people, the persona doesn't stand up anymore. We can't start using those. Now, you spoke a little bit about intersectionality and multiple axes of differentiation under the talk. These were some new terms for me, but fantastically, the concept isn't new. How do I explain this as a father to small children? Is there some sort of layman's smallest terms I can use, or for other people in the community that aren't as attuned to it?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I don't know about framing this for little children. I feel like it might be corrupting their minds too early. But if it were young students, I would say there's an academic who's kind of put it in a more accessible way that I've really liked, which is about asking the other question. And this is really kind of it works across contexts in terms of building critical thinking. But the idea is to say, if you see an example of racism, you ask, where is the patriarchy in this? Or if you see an example of sexism, then you think, where is the heterosexism in this? Right? And this is kind of how she frames it, but the idea is really that if you see an example of some kind of marginalization going on, maybe you can start to attune yourself to being present to other marginalizations that might also be taking place, right? So it's more kind of building the awareness, not making up problems, but really becoming sensitive to what patriarchy looks like when there might be already racism in the mix. Yeah.
So from a society perspective, what would you say is the biggest design challenge of all right now?
That is a really hard question. There are many hard design challenges, so I'm just going to name one that I can think of, right, is with thinking about intersectionality, we end up thinking about difference making, really. So even though we're trying to name the problem, we're also thinking about that problem. And I think we can run into this kind of messy situation where we just have so many intersections, we don't know what to do with them. And so I think it is important to kind of be aware of what kinds of intersections there exist around us and be present to them, but also think about balancing that with what is an academic concept also called solidarity or feminist solidarity. But the idea with solidarity is we look not only at the differences, but we also look at the similarities, right? We also see what we have in common with other people, not just what is different between us. And so thinking about how we can be present to the differences and embrace them, but also thinking about how to build, how to foster, cultivate solidarity. I think that's really the challenge where my head is at right now, and I think that we could have a lot of impact if we thought more about how to do that.
Thank you so much. We have a couple of gifts for you as well.
Thank
Please
you.
give her a round of applause.
Thank you so much.